What is up, App Warriors? It's your boy Edward V, and recently I've been asked this question by a lot of my viewers actually. Does intermittent fasting cause hair loss? Well, let's dive into that as I break it down in this video. Stay tuned. Quickly before we start, this video is brought to you by yours truly, Fledge Fitness and the Fledge Fitness Jump Rope. If you haven't gotten yours yet, what are you waiting for? For only $16.50, you get a jump rope that's ergonomically designed, has an aluminum handle, and swivel design. So you can't go wrong with the Fledge Fitness Jump Rope. You can click on the top right-hand corner of this video or down in the description box below. And of course, as always, guys, thank you so much for your support. Now let's go ahead and jump right into the video. So right off the bat, I'm going to say this, and I think this will give you a good context for any future claims, negative claims of intermittent fasting, or any lingering negative claims of intermittent fasting. What's the actual studies that exist behind that, and are there any attachments that could be done that create a red herring for intermittent fasting? Now, what do I mean by this? Are there studies that's clear cut and dry? And in terms of hair loss, there aren't controlled intermittent fasting studies. And by that, I mean a study that looks at, is it intermittent fasting that is creating that hair loss, or is it the reduction in calories? And by the attachment to something else and then using intermittent fasting as a red herring, that would be, for example, hair loss is caused by malnutrition, or hair loss is caused by a massive reduction in caloric intake. Because that can happen when you do intermittent fasting. People tend to try to use intermittent fasting as the scapegoat, especially if they are hung on that stigma of fasting. They'll be like, well, if you do intermittent fasting, you could lose your hair. That's possible, but it isn't because of intermittent fasting. No studies out there show that intermittent fasting is a direct cause of hair loss. Now, a reduction in calorie intake, yes. Malnutrition, yes. If you do intermittent fasting and you're not able to eat enough calories or get enough nutrients, that can cause those symptoms like hair loss. But it doesn't necessarily mean that intermittent fasting causes that symptom, because you have to use intermittent fasting intelligently. Do not just dive into intermittent fasting. This is something I always tell people. Do not dive into it. Have a plan. Still think of it as something that creates a different type of structure for you that will help you lose weight, but don't just think that it is a get out of jail free card where you don't have to focus on anything, because it'll just work out for you. If you're doing intermittent fasting and you're noticing that there is hair loss, then that might mean that you are not eating enough. You're not getting enough calories in, and you're not getting enough nutrients in, which will probably also mean that you are not measuring the amount of calories that you're taking in. You're just assuming that you're at the correct calorie deficit, where you might be actually really low in your calorie deficit, and you are not measuring the nutrients that you're taking in either. Those two things are important, but to understand the answer to the question, and to understand the answers to any questions from here on out, or the ones that are lingering, that are negative towards intermittent fasting, you have to ask yourself the root. Where is the root of the problem? I can easily say being on any diet can cause hair loss. I won't be wrong, because you could be on a diet, and you could be on a diet strategically and do the right things, or you can be on a diet and be aggressive on that diet, and you can have a strongly decreased caloric intake where you're below 1,000 calories, and now you're in that zone where you're malnourished and you are not getting enough, and you can cause hair loss. You can do the keto diet and cause hair loss. It's not about the keto diet. It's not about the specific diet. It's not about intermittent fasting. It's how you use them and how aggressive you are with the reduction in calories or the reduction in nutrients. When you do intermittent fasting, and this is to stave off that possibility of the hair loss or any of that stuff, when you do intermittent fasting, please make sure that you are at a good calorie deficit. A calorie deficit that makes sense, that doesn't put you below the nutrition that you need, but also allows you to be at a net negative energy balance, which will allow you to burn body fat because your body is expending more energy than it is storing. But don't go so far down this path where you are eating 800 calories. It's the same thing as I spoke about a few weeks back when they were saying, oh, well, intermittent fasting shows that you can lose your period or miss your period as a woman when you're doing intermittent fasting. No, there are no studies that show that. When you read the fine print, they say, well, when you do intermittent fasting, you can undereat, and that's the reason why this happens. They always say that under the caveat is always that. You can undereat, you may undereat. Every single diet or any single regimen that you do for weight loss, you can undereat or you may undereat. They're all susceptible to undereating. Especially when people think, well, if I keep undereating or I undereat even more, I'll lose weight even faster, without understanding the equilibrium part of fitness, where you could be so malnourished or eating so much less than you were before that it actually works against you health-wise, because it's body fat coming off of your body is not the only marker of health. There are other things that you need to make sure that are there for health. You need to be able to consume enough calories and try to consume enough nutrients. That's part of your health as well. Those things are, your body needs that. So just not doing that and not caring and only beelining and focusing and putting blinders on and looking at just the body fat burning, that is a very one-dimensional way of looking at your health. So to answer the question, does intermittent fasting cause hair loss? Does intermittent fasting cause being tired? Does intermittent fasting cause missing of your period? Does intermittent fasting cause weakness or whatever? All of those things, you have to look at the data. There are no studies that show that intermittent fasting makes you miss your period. There are no studies that show that intermittent fasting makes you lose your hair. And by studies showing this, I'm talking about control studies where they take people doing the same caloric intake and it's control. The control group is those who are just at a caloric deficit, and then the intermittent fasting group are at the same caloric deficit but doing intermittent fasting. They haven't done a study that shows that. The only understanding that we have to hair loss via malnutrition are studies that have participants who lose their hair because they're malnourished, because they're under eating. We don't have intermittent fasting specific control studies that show this. So please keep that in mind. Don't let all of these people use intermittent fasting because the word fasting is in there and there's a stigma to that. Let them create intermittent fasting as a red herring to trick you to believe that this is the reason why you are losing your hair. And if you stop intermittent fasting and then just go back to what you were normally doing, which is eating whatever you want, you may not see continuous hair loss because now you are at a caloric surplus, but guess what? Your body fat is also not going to go down. You have to hit that equilibrium and make sure that you are paying attention to how much you're eating. You're not overeating, but you're also not undereating. Those two things are still very important. Hopefully this video has helped you guys and has given you an insight on hair loss and intermittent fasting, or intermittent fasting and anything else that they try to mention that has no direct connection to intermittent fasting. But I digress. I want to thank my patrons for my Patreon. I'm going to go ahead and put their names right up here. And of course, as always, guys, I'll see you on Wednesday for another FAQ. Peace!